many people are coming to their future interactions now, assuming, that one of their triggers is present and that their hurt is about to come back to life. So as a means of protecting themselves, there's a lot of defensiveness, there's not much openness, and there's a lot of argument. And all of a sudden, all these extremely important discussions about illnesses, about race, about the presidency, all of these things, they're becoming winning versus losing, as opposed to trying to come to, a compassionate level of understanding with people.
I'm Casey Main, author, writer, and party girl turned spiritual junkie, and I'm dedicated to helping you better understand the most important and most complicated relationship you'll ever be in, the one you have with yourself. It's the only relationship that you're in for the entirety of your time here, and it affects every single aspect of your life. Yet it is the one most often overlooked. This podcast is here to help you explore that relationship, get to know yourself so you can accept yourself, heal yourself, and become a better version of yourself. So let's get to it. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Better You podcast. I am your host, Casey Main, and as always, I want to start off by just expressing gratitude for the fact that you are here and listening to the show. Whether you have been following along for a while or this is your first time checking it out, just thank you so much for listening. It means a lot to me because I really enjoy doing this. I love talking to all of these different and interesting people and really just exploring and going deeper more into everything that has to do with our relationship with self and kind of why we are the way we are, how we should be handling the present, what we want for the future, just all of it. And super excited about this week's episode. It is, it's not a controversial topic, but we talk about how to handle controversial topics, which I think, considering everything that's going on in the world right now, is hopefully you guys will find it to be a very useful conversation, because I think a lot of us are finding ourselves in situations or in conversations where there's disagreements, there's all these hot button issues that you're either kind of going in that direction or avoiding it. And there's a lot, we're in an election year, there's the pandemic and just everything else that's going on that can cause differing beliefs, I guess, and differing opinions. So kind of how to handle that. You'll hear in the discussion that I mentioned getting a numerology reading, and that was actually with a former guest. So if you have not yet listened to this episode, it's episode 64, Decoding Your Life and Relationship Lessons Through Numerology with Donalyn Savello. I then had a numerology reading with her, and it was really great, just super insightful, but then also, I don't know, just so validating to hear these certain things about yourself or your relationships or kind of these patterns you see in your life, to then see how it shows up kind of in the numbers and in your, she does a combination of numerology as well as gene keys. And it's just, I don't know, I found it very helpful. It's really got me thinking a lot about kind of my life and why I'm here and how I can continue to grow, and just really good stuff. So definitely check out that episode. And if you're at all interested, then book a session with Donalyn. She was great. And then she sent me all these notes afterwards. It was really amazing. And so you're able to get a 10% discount on a reading with her also. So listen to the episode for more information about that. And then I also wanted to share with you guys, for those of you who listened to episode 61, Understand and Embrace Your Uniqueness with Erin Claire Jones, who does human design. So human design is another way of kind of taking your birth information and looking at, not so much it's not predictive in terms of this is how you should live your life. It more helps you understand why the way you are and then how you make decisions. I think that's a super interesting part of human design. And so I just got my blueprint. So I ordered a blueprint from her, which if you listen to that episode, you'll see there's a discount code that you can get a discount on a blueprint, which is really a deep dive into your individual human design. And oh man, I'm still digesting all of that information. So if you guys have any interest in that, I highly recommend it. It was really, really cool stuff to read and better understand myself, which is what this podcast is all about. As far as what we have coming up, I've mentioned before, we're going to have a conversation on breath work, which I'm very excited to share. And then we're also next week, we're going to talk about like sensuality and incorporating that into our lives, because we tend to compartmentalize everything. And a lot of times that aspect of ourselves, like how sexy you feel or just how sensual you are, gets compartmentalized into like a different area of life and then maybe kind of forgotten about and ignored or like lost altogether. So I'm very, very excited to talk to this guest. Her name is Andrea Maximo, and we haven't recorded it yet, but I just know from our pre-call, it's going to be an amazing conversation. You guys are going to love her, and I'm super excited to see how that conversation goes and what the takeaways are from it. But that's going to be next week. So at the time that I'm recording this intro, we haven't recorded the interview, but we will in time for it to be the next episode. So that is a little bit what we've got coming up. And then I also, before we get into today's guest and kind of jump into the episode, I wanted to get y'all's thoughts on something. So I'm debating whether or not I should start a private Facebook group for the podcast. So it would be something I only talk about on the show. You'd be able to find it, but then you'd have to like request access to join. So I'd keep it very private, and just for it to be like a safe space to have further conversations about topics discussed on the podcast. So, for example, as you'll hear in this episode, I share this scenario that I was recently in where someone said something very inappropriate in front of me, and it took me by surprise, and I didn't address it. And then I like beat myself up for weeks afterwards because I'm like, I should have freaking said something, but I was just kind of in like shell shock. And so a question I would pose in the group would be like, what would you have done in that scenario? So stuff like that. And we can kind of just have further discussions and get a little bit more maybe personal with the topics that are discussed on the show. So it's an idea I'm throwing around. If it's something that interests you guys and you think you'd want to be a part of it, then please just shoot me a quick email or DM me on one of the socials and let me know that's something that you would enjoy. It's an idea I've had, and I don't know, just kind of want to get y'all's thoughts on it. Okay, so let's get into this week's episode and a little bit more about our guest. Greg Audino is an advice columnist and host of the Optimal Living Advice podcast in the Optimal Living Daily Network, where he also serves as a producer. There, he uses his background as a certified life coach to help people answer questions about relationships, goal setting, habit formation, personal trauma, and much more. And in this episode, we discuss his story of how he went from being an actor to a life coach and advice columnist, the moment so many of us come to when we realize life isn't actually like the movies, the gender differences of going through a process of self-realization, how personal hurt and trauma impacts how we handle conversations on controversial topics, our tendency to generalize groups and how that discredits individuality, how our beliefs have become part of our identity and what that does to our ability to maintain an open mind, finding the middle point between accepting others and standing up for what's right, how the way we choose to handle controversial conversations is just as individual as every other part of us, how spirituality can help break some of our attachments to what we think makes up our identity, and the human survival tendencies that keep us stuck in caring what other people think about us. So lots of good stuff. I am very excited to share this one, and I'm just super excited for episodes to come. So if you are new to the show and you have not yet subscribed, do that. Follow us on the socials, Instagram and Facebook at The Better You Podcast, so you don't miss an episode. All right, that's it. We're going to go ahead and jump into this conversation with Greg. Okay, so then I definitely want to start with a little bit of your story, because so you're a life coach, you host the Optimal Living Advice Daily podcast, so you're all in the personal development world. But for the most part, people I talk to who are in this space haven't always been. And a lot of times they have like an interesting story of how they got into it. So like,
Yeah.
what is your like self-work story?
Um, I mean, it's kind of funny. It started, if you think about it, it starts, or if I think about it, it started way back when I was a kid. There was this phase I went through in high school where I wanted to be a marriage counselor, like an LMFT. And,
Wow.
yeah, and then I wanted to be a motivational speaker for some reason. Like, I don't know where these ideas really came from. But they were there nonetheless. I think I just, I was always like single as a kid because I was in love with these girls who wanted nothing to do with me. So I would so I would always help my friends with their relationship problems, and I always kind of have had this like romantic view of the world, and so I enjoyed like offering them inspiration in their relationships. So it sort of started there, and then yeah, that I mean that just kind of went to the side. I got very interested in acting at one point, and I decided to do that, and I did. And in retrospect, I think a lot of it is from that same the same desire to sort of understand people and connect with people, even though the industries are very different. So in a way, it's come full circle. But yeah, so I was acting full time from like 22 to 28, and around 27-ish, 29 now, I got my life coaching certification. Basically, there was, yeah, I was doing this thing. I was in the film industry like throughout my 20s, and in case you haven't heard, a lot changes in your 20s. Like you're
Oh
totally
yeah.
shuffling priorities, and so there were a few things that really got me back in touch with that side of wanting to help people at the lack of or at the risk of sounding too self-righteous. And I think the first thing was I went through a very difficult breakup,
Mm.
2014, and I really had an extremely hard time recovering from it. And in that time, I just sort of started to question everything, because a big part of the reason the relationship ended was because like we were long distance. I was in acting, which is an industry that it's very difficult for people to be comfortable with, if you're dating them and they aren't involved with it. So I guess at the end, like I wanted to put my work first as much as because in acting you're just taught to like sacrifice everything for it, which is extremely unhealthy. But anyway, so like with this relationship ended, and I was all of a sudden questioning everything. Like, is this industry going to like tarnish all my relationships? As it does for a lot of celebrities. Very few celebrities out there have these like long successful relationships, with the exception of
Hmm.
like Kurt Russell and Goldie Hawn. Uh,
And Tom
and,
Hanks.
yeah, Tom Hanks. Well, he does nothing wrong. That should go without
Yeah.
saying. And so all of a sudden there was this like huge questioning of my whole existence, and whether or not I was making choices that like really adhered to my values. And in that time, I was reaching out to friends and family for support. I wasn't quiet about feeling bad, but it got to the point where I just sort of felt like I was being a nuisance. Like I had, like used up all these resources to the fullest, and that like people were just like didn't want to hear about it anymore. So in that time, like I just wished I had somebody to listen. And I remember one night I was like crying myself to sleep. What else is new? And I called, or I was going to call, suicide prevention. And it wasn't necessarily
Mhm.
because I was feeling suicidal, but because I knew they would talk to me. Like somebody would be on the other line who was like willing to hear me. Uh, and I think in that moment, I sort of realized how truly valuable it is to be a presence for somebody, no matter what, to be to be a shoulder that they can lean on, no matter what. And so, that was kind of the first strike. And meanwhile, I was working as an actor, not doing anything for anybody else really. It was always about me. And this, it never really sat well with me, because I'm a very fortunate person. I'm a very like blessed person in life, just in many ways. So this idea of continuing to just take from the universe, if you will, and not give anything back became increasingly troublesome. So all of a sudden I'm thinking about like, how can I give back? How can I, get more in touch with my values, be a better citizen? And also, there's this idea of, wow, this helping position is really, or this listening position is really an important thing you can bring to people. Because I was like, even while I was going through this, I was hanging out with friends. I was, laughing all the time, having a great time, high energy. Nobody would have known something was wrong, but there was. And so, I'm also thinking like that's the case for so many people. How many people out there are like hiding these things that really just need somebody that will listen to them when they are ready to talk about them? So there's all that. Then the election came along, the 2016 election, and like whatever side of politics you're on, during the election, there's always like a lot of attention being paid to like legitimate trouble in the world, right? Serious problems. So yet another reminder of like, wow, like the world truly needs assistance, in many ways. And I think, I just sort of referred back to this thing that was always in me, like this nature, this instinct to counsel people. And, I thought, why don't I give life coaching a try? I had recently watched this Tony Robbins documentary. And I was, people have, I guess, mixed opinions about him, but I was very moved by like how many people.
Yeah, I feel like, if you want to feel inspired, watch any clip of Tony Robbins. I feel like the energy just like comes out of the screen into your body.
Oh, well, he's born to do that stuff. He's not born to write. You know what I mean? Like he's born to be on stage without question. So, the thing is, like, so he's just really changed the lives of many people. So, like, and he's a life coach by trade. Like, that's his kind of how he identifies versus as a motivational speaker. So, it was just kind of this whirlwind of things that led me to start wanting to do that, wanting to be in that role. And I thought at the time it was kind of convenient. Like the certification process is not as extensive as it would be if I were to go back for like a master's to become an LMFT or something like that. And I could do it alongside acting, right? Like I could schedule clients alongside my roles. So it just seemed like the right thing to do. And I don't know. I really fell in love with it to the point that, acting is pretty much no more. It doesn't interest me in the way that what I'm doing now does. And, it's grown now at this point. Like I'm hardly coaching anymore because I'm working with Optimal Living Daily full time. And we're, the show Optimal Living Advice is like, it's such a wonderful space to help people out. And I personally feel like I always kind of give a stronger assistance when I'm presented with all the information I need and I can kind of sit with it and then present all of my thoughts, which is obviously the format with that show. It's basically structured as an advice column. So it's, to me, like it's a great, it continues to evolve. And like now I'm producing within the network in addition to hosting the thing, something I never thought I would do. So like in a short time, it's evolved so much. And I don't know where it's going to take me next. I thoroughly enjoy what I'm doing right now. I don't really want much to change. But it's been an interesting journey. And, I guess with acting, I put my heart and soul into it. I blood, sweat, and tears, the whole thing. And I'm very grateful that I was willing to acknowledge change occurring within me and that I decided to see it through as opposed to just sticking with something because there was such a history in it.
Yes, which I think is what a lot of people do. Or it's scary to walk towards that change you feel inside yourself because it's just full of unknowns and it's full of the discomfort that comes with change within yourself, as well as like everybody around you seeing you change. Nobody seems to like that. So I feel that on a deep level. Okay. Well, I have like 18 million questions.
Sorry, I took 10 minutes for that first introductory one. We're going to be here forever.
That's okay. Yeah, that gave me a lot to work with. But first, because I know listeners are going to be curious, in terms of the acting, what would we have maybe seen you in?
I was in a lot of good stuff. No serious roles, like no serious regulars, but I was in a few episodes of Westworld, New
Okay,
Girl.
what season was Westworld? Because I've never watched New Girl, but I did watch season 1 of Westworld.
So I was in season 2.
Oh, missed you.
It's okay. Again, it wasn't like a huge part, although it was. I did have a good death scene. James Marsden blew my head off.
Oh,
Which
nice.
was like the beginning of his murderous spree. It was a pretty pivotal moment for him.
Oh,
Uh,
spoiler alert! I didn't know he was going to go on a murder
oh
spree.
shit! I should have. I'm
What if
sorry.
what if I end up watching season 2?
Oh, you're right. God, don't tell HBO. They'll actually be
Yeah,
angry. They
we're
are
all
crazy.
getting to like the end of Netflix and all series. So, um, okay, all right, Westworld, yeah, that's a big one. New Girl, that's a big one.
Yeah, there's NCIS, Jane the Virgin. I don't know, a bunch of there was a show from Shonda Rhimes called The Catch, which lasted a couple of years that I was in. There was a show that Hugh Laurie had, Dr. House, called
Oh, I
Chance.
love him.
Hey, all right, well that's good. Let me tell you, he is without question the kindest celebrity that I ever had the pleasure of working with.
Really? Oh, I love
Yeah,
learning that because like his character in Dr. House wasn't exactly kind, but it's like he was on a deep level, but he just wouldn't show it. And it was like so frustrating to watch.
Yeah, I know. And it's such a good feeling. It's so relieving when you find out the famous people you like are actually great. He
Yeah.
is. Yeah, we had a scene in which we were like, it was the two of us like having a big argument in an empty parking garage. So like normally on these sets with like, network shows, there's a ton of people around. But because it was just the two of us, there were no extras. It was in like this hot parking garage. So like there weren't like a lot of people that could have been there were like in trailers instead. So there was like just an unusually intimate atmosphere for a network show. And anyway, what that led to was like he and I just having a lot of good time to talk to one another, like heart to heart. And with other shows I had been on, it's just like it's always chaos, and there's always there's typically a lot of people in each scene. So it was harder to get a lot of like rich conversation in with people of that status, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
But I just really enjoyed like he and I actually had great conversation, like way just beyond surface level stuff, and it was really enjoyable. So I always cite Hugh Laurie as my favorite A-lister that I ever got to hang out with.
That makes me so happy. It's funny. I started rewatching a bunch of House episodes during this pandemic as we're all at home more because I'm like, well, this is fitting. Like we all just need Dr. House to come in and like figure out what's going on.
Yeah. 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 If only he were a real person, maybe he'd have an idea about the coronavirus. Who knows?
Yeah. I find the acting thing so interesting because like, do you think that being in the world of acting and so spending your time literally being somebody else versus who you actually are, do you think that contributed to or like escalated this kind of existential crisis you then went to when you kind of started to question everything? Like, do you think those two are related?
That's really interesting. I haven't been asked that before. I'm not sure they are necessarily. I mean, I guess like it was sort of like second nature to look, to step into the shoes of other people. But
Yeah, so that's like an empathy component.
Yeah, I suppose. But I'm not. I don't know if it necessarily correlates. I think if there's one correlation there that made that fueled the existential crisis as if it needed any more fueling was this idea of like, so if you're like I told you, I kind of grow up being a romanticist, and then if you're an actor, you're constantly surrounded by storylines in which like you are taught to to believe in things and to do the right thing, and things will work out for you. So then it's just kind of fairy tale after fairy tale. So that was like a big part of who I was, both as a kid and when I started to do this. And it was as if a piece of me had, it was as if I had to sacrifice that piece of me when I'm like, still kind of missing my ex-girlfriend. And that part of my brain is like, stick it out, never give up. If you love her, that's what you need to do. And like with acting, you set out to do this. Like that's, you have to stick with that. these are storylines that are very popular, that I was
Mm-hmm.
constantly around. And it was very challenging to, to finally just say that there's more to it than that. And to finally be realistic with myself, on at least a subconscious level, that life is not a movie.
Yeah.
And that was really hard. And it really poured into several aspects of my life. So I would say that would be there was definitely a correlation there. I don't know if it necessarily answered your question at all,
No,
but
no, but that just gave me like a different little aha moment because I think I romanticized life and certainly relationships a
mm,
lot when I was younger. And I love rom-coms and all the chick flicks, and so, you grow up with like the Disney movies, and then you get into like the Notebook and all the Nicholas Sparks and everything. And I think there's something to that story that we have about life in our minds. And then we reach a point where like life has kind of beat it out of you that guess what, that story is a lie. Then it's kind of like, then you start questioning everything. Cause it's like your foundational belief about the way life goes all of a sudden crumbles. And you're like, okay, what's really happening here?
yeah, it's an interesting moment. And you're right. I think a lot of adults come to that moment. You sort of have to, right? Uh, but at the same time, it's very dangerous to get your ass kicked by one moment, a moment or a scenario in which, like, yeah, the movie stuff does not apply. But it's in that moment, it's also very important to be as objective as possible and realize that this is one situation and it's very nuanced, as are all situations I might find myself in. And it's not to say that the movie stuff does not always work. You know what I mean? And it's not to
Hmm.
say that, like, maybe in this situation, if I do stick it out with this girl, she will start to like me or whatever. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
because
So
you
I
can
think
like swing the other way and get super jaded, which
exactly.
isn't good either.
Yes, right. And so I think it's just important to be cautious of that, which is difficult to do when you are in such an emotionally turbulent situation and you sort of have to start, fending for yourself in the future, to prevent that situation from coming back. And obviously an easy way to do that, yeah, is to become jaded. Uh, but again, I think it's of crucial importance to realize that these scenarios are all different and that there is time for reality, there's time to be a little extra hopeful, and everything in between.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm curious because like our stories have some similarities in that I, just got kind of beat up in relationship after relationship, not physically, mentally and emotionally, and then kind of reached this point of questioning everything and what am I doing with my life, and I want to contribute more to the greater good, and then got into this personal development, self work, spiritual, whatever you want to call it, this space. But going through that, as I was, crying myself to sleep or talking to friends about relationships and whatever, I feel like that is much more accepted, welcomed, and the norm because I'm a female. Whereas like what was that like for you as a man trying to talk about these what can be seen as like mushy or soft topics? Like did you have friends that are like, okay, yeah, let's talk about your heartbreak, or was it like, toss down a beer and get over it?
Oh my God, that's such a good question. I can see why this podcast does so well. You ask wonderful questions. Yeah, it's so true, and I am a huge advocate for this. Just before I go on this rant, everyone, the best documentary I've ever seen is called "The Mask You Live In." I've pumped its tires like 8
Ooh.
times on my own show. It's basically about like how boys are raised with these like false ideas of masculinity and how like this suppression of quote unquote female emotions leads men to be responsible for 90% of crime, like 70% of suicides. Like there's clearly a lot to be said about how these parts of life for men are definitely suppressed, which is highly unfortunate. So as for me, it was, I have friends from very different circles. My friends back home in Rhode Island, uh, I've been friends with them since I was 5, but in like New England it's not typically commonplace for men to start having these conversations. You know what I mean? It's not to
Mm-hmm.
say that it would be off the table if I wanted to. And there were times I did reach out to guys, like one in particular who, kind of he and I are similar in that way. There's more vulnerability. I could have discussions with him. My other friends, like, again, I don't think it would have been off the table, but it's not a space that we ever find ourselves in. So I naturally just didn't go there. And the same almost it can be said for some family members, again, not off the
Mm-hmm.
table, but just not anywhere we ever went. So I didn't do it. Some of my friends in California, as you could expect, just without generalizing too much, were more open to this conversation. Um, and again, I like to think that all my friends are, not all of them, but a lot of them are close enough to me that, again, that would always be an option. But it's no, like as men, it's hard to do that. And this is why men typically have such a harder time getting through breakups than women, because, our girlfriends or wives or whomever are like, for many men, the only emotional outlet. Whereas
Yeah.
women, as you alluded to, have their friends and like their family. And that's that kind of communication and vulnerability is cultivated from a young age, and it follows women throughout life, which is such a wonderful thing for women. But that's not the case for the majority of men. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that's it was challenging in that way, without question.
Do you encounter any issues with that now? Like, is it hard for you to talk to anyone in your life about like what you're pretty much doing as a full-time job now?
In terms of like like the spiritual part of it, or like the practical elements, like what I do day to day.
More like the spiritual and the fact that it's in, the personal development and the advice. Like, do you get any, I guess, like bro lashback? I hate to like generalize, but I just feel like these things are very real things that men encounter. And I'm sure it's not easy.
It depends. No, not in that way. I think there's a few reasons. Like, I mean, I think for a lot of people, when they're around like a therapist or a psychiatrist or even like a coach or an advice columnist, there's like this, like a lot of people go into this like shell as if they feel as though this person is like studying their every move and like trying to figure them out. So no, there's not really much of that. I'm the only one of my friends who does something like this.
Mhm.
But like in my group of friends, again, especially the ones I grew up with, I was always an outcast in that way. Like none of them, a lot of the guys, they
They didn't want to be marriage therapists when they were younger.
no, they just they hung around home, and a lot of them like work in finance and stuff. And it's not to say they don't enjoy what they do, but it's like I was really always just very different in terms of like my like means of expressing myself and this and that. So I think within that group, like everyone kind of knows what I'm about, and it's not to anyone's surprise. Um, so no, and again, I think as everyone gets older, I hope like there's, especially in this day and age, like there's more and more respect towards this kind of industry because it is becoming so popular, and because
Right.
like
And there's more like self-awareness. I think that's more of a talked about topic. And, mindfulness is big because everyone, it's like, I mean, there's legit science now showing how the stress is killing all of us. And so there is a little bit more of that overall messaging of, you need to be taking care of like your mental health as well.
there definitely is, which is a really nice thing. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think for that reason, it's harder and harder for people to kind of make, I don't know, not make jokes about it, but people don't really like not take it seriously anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
Especially if you
Probably
consider.
because everyone is like dealing with their own shit, whether or not they're to the point where they're going to talk about it or not. But like they are, and they know they are.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, that's another thing. And I think for a lot of these people, like they can finally breathe a little bit, knowing that like, oh, some people do care about this. Some people are going through this as well. Whereas
Hmm.
otherwise, like especially generations past, nobody really talked about these things,
Right.
especially like men from New England.
Right. Yep.
So yeah, it's becoming more respectable, if you will. I think it's always been respectable, but um, yeah. So I just don't think I don't really deal with too much in terms of that.
Yeah.
Uh,
I actually I feel like I might deal with more of it, not actually externally, but just more fears, because I had this weird aversion to anything in like what was considered the self-help industry, like in my
yeah,
20s, like literally would make fun of it. And then now
yeah.
that's the world that I'm in. And I think that's by design. I've just seen that happen too many times in my life, that these things that I was so against for no reason, I then like end up going in that direction and finding happiness there. And like whenever that happens, I'm just kind of like, oh, life, like you're so
Yeah.
clever.
That's wild, Casey. Well, first, I mean, that says a great thing about you. The fact that, again, you were willing to be open to and challenge these old thinking patterns.
Yeah.
Like, not
Yeah.
everyone
It was
would do
not
that.
fun. Yeah.
Plus, I mean, I think that there are some, like nowadays, there are some people in this industry that are making it feel more legitimate.
Mm-hmm.
Like Mark Manson's a really good example. You're familiar with
Mm-hmm.
him? So like,
Yep.
yeah. So for those who might not be, he really comes with a very grounded perspective. Yeah, he's very relatable. He swears a lot. It's funny. Um, but it's who he is.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, he's very realistic about things. He's extremely well read. And the element, like the angle that he brings to self development is so different from this idea of like, the flowery, just chanting mantras kind of thing, that I think a lot of people were accustomed to in the past. And like that version of self-help, that outdated version, is really easy to sort of laugh at.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
there's a lot of people that line their pockets doing it still.
Yep.
But I think there are also people, again, in the same vein as Mark Manson, who are really trying to come at it from a more like, again, just realistic, grounded perspective, which is
Yeah,
really
like
helpful.
Tim Ferriss has like a very like he's like a computer guy almost, like so it's like a very systematic approach to like
Hmm.
optimizing like human beings. So people like really people really relate to that too. Okay, so shifting gears a little bit, but that was kind of like a nice segue, because now you give advice for a living, essentially, both on the podcast. And for those who aren't familiar with it, so the Optimal Living Advice Daily podcast is part of the Optimal Living family. And so now there's Optimal Living Daily, then there's a finance one, a relationships one, your advice one. Is there another one? Is there a
Yeah.
business
Yes, there's
one?
health.
Oh,
There's
health. Yeah,
health.
yeah, health.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's five.
Yeah. And I love them. And I can't remember when or how I found them. But I had Lee, one of the founders, on the podcast. I think it was the first episode in this calendar year.
Mm.
So for people listening, if you haven't checked out that family of podcasts, definitely do. But so you give advice through that, and then coaching is also like advice. And so one of the things I really just wanted to get your input on, selfishly, because I feel like I struggle with this, is there's like just so much controversy out there right now. Like, and there's so many hot button issues. So we are in an election year, which is always controversial, but I feel like this one maybe more so than others, or they just
I think
keep
that's fair to
getting
say.
worse. I don't know. There's an entire movement for social justice that has a lot of people split on what their role is or isn't. There's the coronavirus, which has caused a crazy amount of fights within even my own family, because different people have different views of like what is considered safe and responsible behavior. And so then can you see each other, and are you allowed to visit grandchildren? And it's just, there's like so much out there, plus just all the normal landmines of like religion and politics. And I feel like we're getting to a point where we avoid so many of these topics that then it's like creating all of our conversations to just be very superficial, which is then not actually connecting us, and is making people feel more like alone and isolated, which, considering a lot of people are home right now, given whatever their quarantine restrictions are, like that's not helping. And so I want to start to move towards like, how do we deal with these controversial topics? So let's start with like some of the big world ones. But then if we have time, like we have like hot button issues just within ourselves. Like we all have like our own triggers, that like relationships. So if we have time to get into that, we can.
Sure.
But should we be like, should we be avoiding confrontation, or should we, what do we do? Like, how do we handle this?
uh, I don't think it's. I think it's if you're talking about avoiding confrontation, I think it's about redefining confrontation. Um,
Mm.
so it's interesting to me, like the way this, the way I see a lot of people acting right now is basically what I see from people all the time, like coaching clients, whatnot. Basically, whatever side of whatever argument you're on, pick one. There's whatever side you're on. Your standpoint is basically coming from past experiences, past hurt, past narratives, negative commentary, whatever. Whatever has led your belief systems to be what they are is based on your past conditioning. So you could kind of compare that to somebody who's been through a very specific trauma in their life, right? So all of a
Mhm.
sudden, whether it's you with the trauma or the group of people with the collective trauma about anything, you can you arrive at this point where you've been hurt, and now the question is, how am I going to put this on the rest of the world? How am I going to teach? How am I going to interact? Am I going to let this hurt? Am I going to do what where a lot of people go wrong? Am I going to start to be vicious and fight and attack, as a means of protecting myself? Or am I going to be open? Am I going to, like we were saying earlier, am I going to understand that each situation is unique and that my trauma is not really reflected in as many situations as my brain might insist that it is for the sake of my own protection? And of course, the answer, at least when you're counseling people individually, is yes, to help them understand the difference between different scenarios, help plunge them into the present and be communicative and honest, um, and open in their dialogues with people and in situations in which, yeah, maybe, their trauma is being flared up. But that's something you learn how to do through therapy. It's not easy to do that when you've been through so much trauma, and the same goes for society at large right now. So, I mean, to me, the thing is, there's a bunch of hurt, uh, you know, on a million different sides about a million different things, and many people are coming to their future interactions now, assuming that that one of their triggers is present, and that their hurt is about to come back to life. So as a means of protecting themselves, there's a lot of defensiveness, there's not much openness, and there's a lot of argument, and all of a sudden all these extremely important discussions about about illnesses, about race, about the presidency, all of these things are just they're becoming winning versus losing, as opposed to trying to come to a compassionate level of understanding with people. And there's just yes, there are a lot of people encouraging others to think differently in the way that they think is best, but so much of this, again, because of all the hurt, is being done with aggression. And when you are so aggressive, when you're like rooting against evil, when you are put yourself in a place of opposition, all you're doing is really fueling these people, because nobody wants to be wrong. People want to be listened to and respected. So if you are trying to change somebody, even in a way that you feel like is so good and so right and so healthy, and you see that they disagree with you, it cannot be a matter of attack. It simply can't. How often have you ever responded well to somebody that just screamed at you and told you what to do? Unless you were like a
Mhm.
child and like it was like a scarring experience that like led you to doing something, like that doesn't work. You have to arrive at these conversations with a level of respect and openness, being willing to hear that other person, and hopefully give them, ideally both parties are giving each other enough space to then create a healthy dialogue about, like, these are our differences, why do we have them, let me learn something from your side and I'll learn something about theirs. And But there's none of that. It's a very defensive approach right now. It's very volatile and it's aggressive, and it's people sticking to their guns, aka their traumas, and not being willing to challenge themselves and to be wrong in a time when being wrong is just like the worst thing you could possibly do.
Yeah, being
So
wrong and admitting that you don't know everything. Like
yeah.
there's been several times that it probably drives my boyfriend crazy, but he'll be like, "Well, don't you think blah blah blah?" And I'll go, "I don't know enough about the matter to have an educated opinion, so I don't know." But
Yeah,
like,
that's unreal. Like that's how it should be, though. You think anybody has the answers to all this stuff?
yeah,
No, I
like
mean
I just recognize I don't know enough to really have a solid opinion, so I have no opinion.
that's wonderful. Yeah, I mean that's a very Socratic view of these whole things, and unfortunately, like that's vilified now. People are like,
Yeah,
you need to take a side.
yeah,
This
you
is
have to stand
important.
for something. Yeah.
Yeah, learn more if you don't know enough. Like, but like there are so many variables that you just can't take into account for. Like you take people at the top of their industries dealing with this kind of stuff. Just take like the presidency. You have the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, and typically the people in positions of power in each party have studied politics their whole life, have been a part of it their whole life, really, really saturated themselves in it, yet will arrive with entirely different perspectives on how the right way to do things is.
Hmm.
So, like, it's so there's just not like one easy to detect correct way of doing things. And it's incredible to see again how people can study the same things for so long and become so well versed, yet end up with totally different perspectives on in terms of what's right. You really don't see that with too many industries. Typically, it's like this is what needs to be done for success. Let's all try to do this together. Whereas in politics and many other areas, there's just complete division. Uh,
Right.
in spite of
Which I guess
people.
is what makes them controversial because
Mm,
there's no one thing everyone agrees on, but then there's also like no agree to disagree and be
yeah.
okay with that. And I think that ties back to, I love that you brought up like personal hurt, because at first glance, someone might be like, well, what do you mean? Like, I haven't been like, I don't have any personal pain that is driving what my political beliefs are. Yet a lot of times when you talk to people, and really like drill down into it, it will come down to either a personal story for them. Well, I lost my job because this, or this whatever closed down, which impacted my family, or it's like a family, like just a generation above. Like it does come down usually to like a very personal hurt, which then I guess is what's like really driving that defensiveness, because we think someone disagreeing with us is like invalidating our pain, maybe.
Mm, yeah, I think that's exactly right. And again, yeah, it's so easy to just jump to that conclusion, like this person's invalidating my pain. Whereas, again, if you were to have conversations with a lot of these people, they are all very nuanced in their opinions, and the disagreement does not mean an attack. They're just so there are so many layers within all of it. It's incredible, and yeah, of course, there are extremists, but the way that that's being framed now is that the extremist, like everybody's an extremist. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? There's so little gray area being taken into consideration right now. And that's, again, that's what's wrong. Like you're hurling your opinions of like, extremists, I guess, for example, onto all these people, telling them accusing them of being something they aren't, putting their identity into question. You can't put somebody, you can't do that with people. You can't say that like tell them something about their identity that they don't believe is true. You can't say that they're less than because of their identity. Like you just doing that will never help anyone make progress. It's simply too personal an attack. But that's what
Yeah.
we've fallen into.
Well, and I find that so interesting, and I'll hear it in a lot of conversations of people making these assumptions or making these statements about a certain group and their experience, whether that be of race or political beliefs or whatever. And it just makes zero sense to me. Granted, I will say I've never been I've never been super into politics. Like it's never been my thing. So I've never really felt very like emotionally charged about it. So I find it really interesting when people are, but I recognize that a lot of people are and I am not. But we'll make these statements, these generalizations about groups and what they have or have not experienced or what is or isn't true for them. And I'm kind of like, hold on a minute. Like that makes zero sense. Like we each only know our own individual experience, which is unique within our race, unique within our political beliefs, unique within our family, our friends, our socioeconomic status, our religious or spiritual beliefs. Like we each have our own very unique experience. And like, if I were to try and sit here and tell you that I know what it's like to be you, you'd be like, no, you don't, because no one knows what it's like to be you other than you. And so it's like, if people come at us like that, we're like, you don't know what it's like to be me. Yet we then constantly make these statements and assumptions about other people. Like it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And I mean, people do this to try to make sense of things. It's so much easier to have a side and to think it's right when you can compartmentalize like that. But of course, it's never accurate. But yeah, I mean, everything you're saying is absolutely right. And it is so interesting that like these days, there's a lot of emphasis on like what's right, for the individual. But there's that concept at the same time completely ignored. Because as you said, everybody within a race, within a political party, within anything is totally nuanced. You know what I mean? And there are just, again, there are so many layers, and when you discredit those layers that people have, and you just spring like a whole manufactured identity on them based on what you've seen a lot in the past and extreme examples of maybe hurtful situations, all of it is lost. You know what I mean? There's a complete disconnect now between you and that person. They only strengthen their opinions so they can combat you, because now you're like appearing as somebody to them that only generalizes and is too extreme. And it's a very obvious cycle. And I guess if you're not used to practicing mindfulness or stepping into the shoes of others or whatever you want to call it, it's hard to see it. And again, like the first instinct is to look out for number one, figure out what's right and wrong so things seem more sensible. But this cycle is so clear to see, and it's extremely destructive, needless to say. And I mean, who knows how it gets broken, with the exception of just taking this mindful approach and this nuanced viewpoint of other people and their opinions into each conversation.
Yeah, and that doesn't mean we can't have debates or disagreements. I think, like, let's talk a little bit about like the right way or the best way to disagree with somebody, because I had this realization a while ago, and it's really helped me a lot. It's like when we're trying to change somebody, even change their mind, a lot of times we trick ourselves into thinking we're doing a good thing because it's what's quote unquote best for that person, or they need to see the truth, or they need whatever. Like we're convinced it's the right thing. But I really think actually anytime you're trying to change anything about another person, that's judgment. You're trying to change it because you think it's wrong versus just trying to understand them and accept the way that they think and what they believe, because that's just who they are and where they are in their journey right now. And that be that. And so then like agree to disagree. But I think a lot of times we get stuck in this, it's what's best for this individual, or it's what's best for society that I change this person's mind. But I don't know, to me, like that's just judging.
It is, yeah. And again, people don't really conceive of such a thing when they are very convinced that they know what's right. But yeah, it is. So I think, arriving at conversations like these, it says that you brought up something interesting about how, it can be, when you're putting somebody's identity into question, and when you are telling them what's right and advising them in a way that you think is meaningful. So it's interesting because like one of the quote unquote or one of the unwritten rules anyway of advice is that like it can actually be dangerous to give people advice when it comes to things that make up a big part of who they are or like their perceptions of themselves. You know what I mean? Like if
Hmm.
you say somebody's taking like a math test and they really pride themselves on their ability to do math. If you like try to help them because like maybe you did well in math or like recommend a calculator or something like that. Again, with like coming from a kind-hearted standpoint, it can actually be very difficult because now they feel as though again they're like this part of themselves that they take huge pride in is being devalued. Uh,
Hmm.
and nowadays, in terms of politics and everything that we're sort of talking about, because it has become so rampant, these beliefs have become large parts of who people are, and they're so sold
Hmm.
on them. So again, hearing advice from others or anything in regard that challenges that is very difficult. Um, so yeah, it's weird. Obviously, I think when you're having a conversation with somebody who does not agree with you about something that means a lot to them, it's going to have to come to a point where you let them be. But I think again, because we've said a few times about how people get these like stereotypes of the opposition in their mind. The best thing you can do is to set an example that defies that stereotype, which is really just like being a good listener, being someone who's willing to question, and making it not so much about pushing your viewpoint as opposed to understanding theirs, and thus
Hmm.
asking healthy questions from them. And I think within those questions, within that dialogue, there's opportunity to challenge a bit. And again, it doesn't have to be an aggressive challenge. It doesn't have to threaten their ego. It doesn't have to be belittling, but if the conversation can be made to feel like a safe space at the beginning, where it's like I just want to learn, I'm curious to hear what you think. That it's very easy to maintain that vibe if that's the foot you start off on. So, like I was asked recently on another podcast I was doing, the guy was like, "So how do you handle people that are like, well, the problems with Mexicans?" Um, and I was like, I love conversations like that because it's such a good opportunity to like be the example that, I believe, based on what I do is a good one. And that is to be a good listener and a supporter and like a questioner, and to be like, all
Hmm.
right, so why do you think that? And to hear people out and help them feel respected, at which point their trust is gained, and then they are able to perhaps see your side, perhaps be willing to change, uh, you know, whether or not it's right to do it based on the conversation. But it's that trust needs to be built before change can happen. If that.
Okay. Yeah, I love that. Um, okay, but a question kind of within that realm, because where I get stuck sometimes is then I'm thinking maybe I'm being way too accepting to the point where, I'm not standing for anything, as people
Mm,
say, or I don't know, I'm not doing the right thing by not speaking up. And it's funny, I did a numerology reading earlier this morning, and like my big lessons in this life are setting boundaries, but then also like speaking up, but in like a positive way. So I'm like working on that.
mm,
And I think I told you this scenario when we had our pre-call. So my boyfriend's purchased some acreage in kind of in like the middle of Florida, so like out in the middle of nowhere, this small little town, but really like in the country. And we're going to build a little cabin, and we might like farm some hay or whatever. But we both like to just get away, be in nature, kind of get away from the hustle and bustle. I've kind of always wanted to live in a small town since I saw the movie Doc Hollywood when I was a
mhm,
kid with Michael J.
mhm,
Fox. But so we went to go, the land is like undeveloped. And so it's got to be cleared first. And so we went to go down there and check on how the clearing was. And so we're standing there. It's me, it's my boyfriend, it's his dad, and it's the two guys doing the land clearing and just chit chatting, whatever. And I think now I maybe should have mentally prepared myself for what could come up in this conversation, but I just didn't. I'm just kind of going along, whatever. And one of them like said the N word in passing,
mm,
which I'm not okay with. And it just
yeah,
completely caught me off guard to the point where I think I was like in shock for a
yeah,
second because I forgot like where I was. And And I didn't say anything. And I felt so uncomfortable. And then afterwards, I could not stop thinking about it. I'm like, what was my role in that? Like, do I
Yeah.
say something, or do I just understand that this individual is where he is? Like, I get stuck between when do you bring up this kind of stuff? And like, how do you do it in a way that is not picking a fight, but is maybe letting someone know, like setting those boundaries of like, I'm not okay with that, like around me.
Yeah, that's, it really is a very difficult question to answer. Because on the one hand, like you can't manufacture a stance on something. I mean, it seems like you were shell shocked there, and in retrospect, you wish you could have done something different. But again, you couldn't in that moment, in that shell shock. It's like, well, you just weren't in a position to say something, and that's okay. Maybe you will be
Yeah.
next time that happens. Hopefully, it doesn't happen again. But um, you know, but I think there's just a lot of ways people handle this. So like Amy Dickinson, of Ask Amy.
No.
So Ask Amy. She's like America's advice columnist. She's with the
Oh,
Chicago Tribune. So like her approach, from what I've gathered in situations like this, is to be very direct, to like put people in their places, and that sort of just reflects her values, and that's okay. Uh, so I think, whereas like I'm a little more passive in terms of that. Like, I guess if I were in that situation and that guy said something, I would have loved to have a conversation with him about it if he wanted to have one. Like,
mhm.
for example, if he were to ask me, like, if I shared his sentiment, I would have, happily said no. And, but I had a good conversation with him about like why he feels the way he does, and then why I feel the way that I do, you know, and rather than like trying to police my opinion onto people.
Right.
Because again, if you were to do that with this guy that you don't know, um, that can come off as aggressive. And like,
Mhm.
is that a scenario in which some aggression is maybe okay because it is so extreme? Like, yeah, maybe. Uh, but at the same time, again, like, that is not going to help him change that viewpoint. So I think for somebody like you in that scenario, it's a good opportunity to, again, say like, this is somebody I disagree with, and how can I be open to this person though? How can I see something in them worth loving? And how can I accept this person in spite of our differences, and take that acceptance and that care into conversations with this person in the future, and thus provide a space for them to maybe change their viewpoints about it. But again, it's not on you or anyone to like yell at people or like attack them, even if it is for such a good cause. Like, it's just there's so much involved in scenarios like that that's hard to take into consideration. You know what I mean?
No, I know. And it's so hard too. And I feel like what everything you just said is probably where my mindset would have been had I not recently read the book White Fragility, which really just blew my mind on like why it's so difficult for white people to really recognize what's going on with race. Granted, that's one woman's opinion, it's one woman's book, but it's just like, oh, am I being like complicit with all this? So I think just with politics, I feel like it's easier for me to have zero emotions. I do not care at all.
Yeah.
But with race, I get much more sensitive, and so that's one that's a tough one for me of like
Yeah.
how to navigate that, which actually makes me curious. I hope you're okay with me asking you this question. I feel
Oh.
like white men are kind of having a hard time right now. Like, it's probably not great to be a white man. Like,
Uh,
are you feeling that at all? Like,
I don't know. I mean, again, it's like it's in everybody's experience is different. Um, yeah, like, I guess being like a white guy is sort of in question right now for a lot of people. But it really, it depends like on how you think about certain things. Like,
mhm.
uh, yeah, like a lot of white guys feel as though they're like not in a space to be heard anymore, like by other communities anyway.
Hmm.
and that like their opinions are somehow less because like, historically white men are like the most uh, fortunate combination of like sex and race.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, but again, like that is yet another generalization, uh, because obviously many white men have had extraordinarily difficult lives. So again, going back to the individual part of it, like if anybody is like thinking my opinion or whatever is less legitimate because I'm a white man or however else you want to put it, like I accept that because it's where we're living and people that have those opinions again, like goes right back to the beginning of the conversation. They have those opinions for a reason, and I'm
Hmm.
not going to step in and be like, no, my opinion does matter, um, just for the sake of like protecting my ego. It's why do that? I think it's a much better use of my time, given like the role that I've chosen in this life. It's a much better use of my time to explore why they feel that way and to be, open and loving with them if we do have a conversation that could perhaps get them to see differently. And if they do, they do. And if they don't, they don't. And again, it's a very my approach to this, I'm sure, has lost like half of the viewers already because it is a little more passive. But that's like, I mean, that's suitable to like how I choose to live my life, and it's
Right.
like that, like what I believe is like a sense of like openness and curiosity is what helps me to do my job as an advice columnist, as a life coach. You know what I mean? And maybe it doesn't take like really hard sides or like stand for anything too much, but again, it's in my best interest as long as I'm showing respect to people, as long as I'm trying to continue to educate myself. It's in my best interest to listen, take inventory, accept, and go from there.
Yeah, well, and I think that also like that's your lane. And so I think ultimately this all comes down to because if people are on the, hating white men thing, then that's just falling into the generalizing a group based on gender, race, whatever, even socioeconomic status, like that we're trying to get away from. Like ultimately it comes down to recognizing the individuality within everybody. Like that's just kind of but I think it's just so hard for us to do because that makes every problem more difficult to solve because then there's never one answer. There's 18 million answers based on all the different individuals involved. And I think our brains like more of a grouping and categorizing to help
Oh
things not
yeah,
be so overwhelming.
without question they do. Yeah, we've said it a few times. Like the easier it is to classify things into right and wrong, the easier it is to have confidence in your viewpoints. So
Hmm.
we desperately need that because like people hate the uncertainty, but you have no choice but to have the uncertainty. So yeah, like you're right. It should all be more nuanced. Um, and all you can do is set an example. Like yeah, like you said, like saying that like white men have less valid opinions because they're white men right now. Like sure, that's a form of generalizing, but in order for me, but there's everybody's being generalized in different ways,
Right.
stereotyped in different ways. Like that's just maybe the card that white men have right. Uh,
Yeah.
and to me, like in order to practice what I preach, it's important to say like, all right, that's opinion. I accept them, and I realize that that's just their opinion and not reflective of whatever community they belong to. So like, you know, that's how I would approach their side of it. And from my side of it, it's like, well, uh, I'm don't really think of myself like as a white person or a man like before, just like my own individual. Like these are labels that I don't really concern myself with. So for me, it's just like I am kind of my own thing, and I think that what I think or what I believe does not need to hinge on my sex or my race. And if I am creating viewpoints based on what I think other men are or other white people are, then I'm just kind of again devaluing my individuality and living a life that I don't want.
Yeah, and I think that that just brings up a good point of, we get attached to all these things as part of our identity of like who we are. And so we get
Mm.
very attached to or we think it's who we are. Like we think like I think like I am a white woman, but I think the further you go down, especially if you get into the more spiritual world and really opening your mind up to like bigger concepts, and you start to realize that's not who I am. Like that's the little like human body machine I'm walking around in, but like that's not who I am. Like I am much deeper than that and much bigger than that, as is everybody else. So like the spiritual component helps me detach from some of those things that can be those like triggers that cause people to take things so personally. Like I really try and not take anything personally anymore, because it's not, I don't know. I just recognize like I'm bigger than any of those attacks.
Yeah, and that's a great thing to be able to recognize, because I think that a lot of people don't recognize that. They might think that they do, but to, come at it, to respond to situations like that with violence and attack or defensiveness, as opposed to understanding. I think those are, the people that don't necessarily trust their individuality so much, and don't trust the fact that, like, I can separate myself from this as an individual. I can be above this as an individual. So I think almost just recognizing your individuality and being able to step aside from it is a privilege in itself. It's a really wonderful thing, and it would be. It's weird, because you would think that more people would like to do it or would want to do that, but at the same time, our innate need for community is
Mm-hmm.
extremely strong, especially in the face of trauma. So it is, easily, every study has confirmed it. It's like it's common knowledge that we tend to veer towards those who, the groups that we feel a part of. You
Yeah,
see
like
it
that in
everywhere.
group out group bias. Yeah.
Without question, you see it absolutely everywhere. It goes way past, like, sex and race. Like, so I play hockey, for example. I just played this morning, and like in hockey, like, see a lot of the kids with like the same fucking haircut. They're using the same like terminology out there, the same like clothes. It's hysterical. And it's not, and again, it's everywhere. It's not just hockey guys. It's just this need to fit in and like receive the identity of a full group, and like thus bear the burden of an entire group, is it's something that a lot of people can't help but to do. And I don't know what the magic elixir is to get past that. I think a lot of it is just kind of exploring what makes you more, and like thrusting yourself into different communities, different viewpoints, and stuff like that. But it's hard for people to do. Like, we really need to feel like a part of the pack, going, way back to when to when the human race began. It's always been a part of what we do. It's a survival tactic. But the way it's manifested now is obviously different than it manifested on the African savannas back then.
Right.
But it's still there, same thing.
Yeah, and I don't think we do get past it, and that's maybe one of the traps, is we're like trying to get past it, when in reality, like, that's just part of our human wiring. So I always try to think of it more as like, okay, well, I just recognize it and be like, and call it out when you see it, like, oh, look at that, like, I'm carrying what people think because there's safety in numbers and tribe mentality, and I think that
Definitely.
I'll be safe here. And just that awareness, like, that awareness can be, and that comes with like mindfulness and all this stuff, or even just trying to like intentionally work on it. But that is like those small reminders of like, oh, okay, if you're aware of it, then you're bigger than that. It's just like kind of this reactionary thing that you have, and it's there, but it's not who you are.
Definitely. And of course, for those who maybe who want to balance the two, or take, again, like a less passive approach, I think that you can simultaneously maintain the sense of individuality and want to stand up for your community. You know what I mean? Like, these things can be one and the same. Or they can go hand in hand, rather. They're different things, but they can go hand in hand easily. It's not like it's one or the other. So, like, I would recommend that people do not, not to be too afraid of their individuality. Like, if you're under the impression that it's going to cost you your place in the group, that's not how it works. If anything, the example you set in doing so could expand the mindset of your group.
Right. If your
Especially,
individuality costs you your place in the group, then you're probably in the wrong group.
yeah, exactly. Right.
Find a more accepting group.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Well, all right. Well, we're coming up on kind of a long podcast here, so we'll wrap it up. We'll have to have you back on to talk about relationship triggers another time,
I'd
because
love that.
that I think is just like a fascinating topic, and that I think is more like when those triggers come up in relationships. Like I think it's like your responsibility to go there. Like that's the work. So you can't necessarily tiptoe around it. I want to close out with I love to get this from guests like who are really in this space. What are some of your favorite um, books or teachers? Like what has really helped you along your journey of like self-awareness?
Uh, a lot of it is just it's just a lot of it's. I remember I took a philosophy class in high school, and the last day, I remember he just said, "Question everything," and
Mm,
and that just really stuck with me. I've read a lot. I'm looking at my pile of books right now. They're all wonderful in their own way. I mentioned Mark Manson. I really like him.
hmm
Um, I like books that are written in particular by therapists, psychiatrists. I'm looking at a great one right now called "Unfuck Your Brain" by Faith P. Harper, which is really good. It's really good. Um, but I guess what I'm saying is like it's really just it's become it's just so easy for me to teach myself by questioning everything and being willing to step into the gray areas of all of these situations in life, and to constantly check in with myself and be like, nope, ego steps back. Let's first see what all this is about. Let's look at the gray area. Let's assess it as objectively as possible. Um, so in a way, it's just a natural thing, and I'm in that rhythm now so much, especially now that I'm like doing what I'm doing. That it's second nature is to constantly be willing to question and be willing to put your ego aside and acknowledge like when you're just leading with the wrong set of values. So as much as like I want to recommend certain teachers and books, like I think of it, a lot of it is just repetition in daily life.
hmm
You see it all the time. It's absolutely everywhere. The opportunities to do this, whether it's something you're facing or if you see like a confrontation between two people, it's everywhere. It's constantly just the idea of where is this person coming from? What hurt are they trying to have? Are they trying to heal right now? And how are they trying to be heard? And therefore, how can I be a vehicle for them to do that? And, you know, therefore become an ally. Um, again, the opportunity it happens a million times a day. Um, but anyway, as I look at my books, I'll give you books. I don't want to blow off the question entirely. One I really like called Lost Connections by Johan Hari.
hmm
Great book about depression and like reassessing depression and overcoming it in a way that's not reliant on medication. Said Unfuck Your Brain. That's a really good one. Both of Mark Manson's books are terrific. Everything is fucked, and and the other one is The Subtle Art of Not Giving
Every
a Fuck.
book you like
I
has
was.
fuck in the title.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I know. I'm realizing that now,
That's
so I tried to
okay.
speed through it. I also read a really wonderful book recently called Contagious by Jonah Berger, which is basically just about how ideas are spread and like basically what makes things go viral. It's
Ooh.
mostly a book about marketing, but I will be a monkey's uncle if that book isn't like the best psychology book ever. It's all about why people latch onto ideas in masses and stuff, and it is truly fascinating.
Yeah.
So
Well,
that's a
marketing
book.
at this point in time is psychology.
Oh
Like
my god! Yes,
it's
yes.
that's why everyone's so successful with it because they're just messing with our brains.
It's incredible. They are very impressive. I mean, like hats off to them. They have it figured out. But yeah, you're right. Um,
Okay, well that definitely works. You gave us books and a couple like mantras and question sequence. I like that.
sure,
That's very actionable.
yeah.
Okay, so tell everybody where they can find you, follow you, remind them about the podcast, all that good stuff.
Sure. So the the network is Optimal Living Daily. We have 5 shows, 2 of which I host. One is Optimal Relationships Daily, in which I narrate great relationship content from, again, like therapists, psychiatrists, coaches mostly. And my show, the only show that is not a narration in the network, is Optimal Living Advice, uh, on which I take viewer questions And I answer them, and just they're short episodes, about 10 to 12 minutes, and it's extremely fulfilling. We talk about a variety of different things. Basically, I say everything has come up, but I guess that's impossible. But we talk about a wide variety of things. Very, very fulfilling. So I would check that out. If you want to find me on Instagram, my Instagram is simply Gregel, Gregles. It's kind of fun. And yeah, I guess that's about it. My website, gregaudino.com, is a little bit outdated, to be honest. But when I started this line of work, I was creating videos, which is how I got in touch with the guys at Optimal Living Daily in the first place. So if you go on that website, you'll see about 70 different videos, a few articles that are all constructed by me, just talking about different topics. So that's pretty much where you can find.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on and being willing to tackle the controversy of even talking about controversial topics. I appreciate that. I think it's very relevant right now, and I know that it's not easy to discuss. So I very much I'm very grateful that you were willing to have this conversation.
Yeah, I'm grateful to have been able to have it. Thank you, Casey. I enjoyed myself.
Okay, that will do it for this week. Thank you all so much for listening. I hope you found this conversation helpful and valuable, and at least maybe recognize that you're not alone in how you maybe struggle with handling all the conversational landmines that exist in our world today. As I mentioned in the intro, please let me know what you think of the private Facebook group idea, if that's something you guys would find valuable. If you are not already subscribed to the show, definitely hit that subscribe button on whatever podcast platform you're currently listening so you can join us for future shows. Follow us on the socials, Instagram and Facebook at The Better You Podcast. And if you're loving the show, as always, I ask that you please leave a review and a rating. That really helps a lot, and I appreciate it. And I think that is it. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day and a fabulous week.